Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. And in the last couple of weeks, we have seen a lot of things happen in the South African rugby transfer market, with players departing, players being confirmed, moving between our franchises, and some pretty big blows with regards to some of the talent that we are losing from this country that's moving overseas to play their club rugby elsewhere. Unfortunately, it is a reality at the end of the day. And I think what's quite interesting is we are still seeing a trend of basically two types of players that move overseas. Players that basically haven't quite been able to make the Springbok squad and are playing well, even some that aren't playing as well, that basically almost sort of give up inverted commas on their Springbok dreams, or maybe feel that they need to move away to try and find or try and prove something. Then also we've got the other types of players on the complete flip side who are kind of moving away because they're kind of in the box squad and they're kind of within that setup and now feel that they are settled enough that they can make the move away and still be picked. It's not usually very likely that players get picked for this box for the first time if they're not within the setups whilst playing overseas. You know, there are some exceptions. Bowen Fenter, for example, last year, if you look at Jada van der Mesh now being included in alignment camp, Jasper Wiese is probably the best example of a player who was playing overseas during the more recent sort of Rugby years and made his debut from his overseas form. But in general, post kind of 2019 especially, most players that make their debuts for the Boks are playing their rugby in South Africa. And it's definitely statistically proven that you have a better chance of making the Boks squad playing your rugby here, or for the first time at least, than if you are overseas. But I think that certain players, maybe not even give up, for example, but kind of feel that they can't do much more. They're still not getting the chance, and as such, an overseas move kind of makes the most sense. And basically what we're going to do is kind of look at the different South African franchises and kind of see where they are with regards to their transfer market. And it's interesting because I think the Lions have done some fantastic business, but we've only actually brought in one player, or announced one player, one major player so far. And I still think they've done really well, and we'll basically show you exactly why. Before we get into it, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Let's start with the Sharks, shall we? Who, as we know, always have the big budget. And they're in for an interesting off-season, I think. Excuse me. So basically, they are bringing in Thomas Otoy, and Nemo Rulufsa, Sebasetu Menabelele, very talented young hooker from the Bulls. I think that's a bit of a steal, to be honest, especially as a long-term replacement for Bongi Manambi, who is kind of getting on in years, although has signed an extension through to 2028. And then two very interesting signings, and Stefan Levis, who was captaining Harlequins at a stage, and as well as Johnny Lombard, who came back to the Lions, had a bit of a decent run of form, but once again, injuries continued to plague his kind of career. So if you look at the ins, I think that Levis is an intelligent signing. I think Thomas Toy is a fantastic signing. Arguably, I think next to the likes of a Wilco Low, the best signing any of the sides have made ahead of next season. But I don't think they necessarily are bringing in massive star power. And you look at some of the players they are losing. So, for example, Clebot Lamini has been overseas on loan at Dragons. He's actually been snapped up by Sale. Sia Khaleesi making that move back to the Stormers, a big move there for him. Grant Williams is the big loss over there. And that's kind of inflated by the fact that Lakanya left mid-season, as well as Bartek Lekani, who they knew was leaving. But they have lost some big names. And I don't think necessarily they've been able to replace, you know, the type of players with who they've got coming in at the moment. Do they have some of the players in the depth come through? Yeah, I think to a certain degree. But I do think that Grant Williams is going to be a massive miss for them. I do think that they're probably looking at Bartek Lekani, looking at right now and going, you know, he would have offered a lot for us. But at the end of the day, they had so much loose forward depth. But now losing Sia Khaleesi, there probably would have been space. The good news for them is that they have managed to make a couple of key extensions. The main ones for me are Pepsi Buthelezi. That was the big extension for them announced this season. Obviously, Bongi Manambi, Vincent Koch are important extensions as well. But, you know, I think that Pepsi Buthelezi is a player who is going to play many more years for the Sharks, 27 years old. He's kind of hopefully coming to the peak of his powers. So from the Sharks side, I think Khaleesi leaving is always going to be a big loss. You know, you lose a lot of marketing value, you lose a lot of experience in the change room, obviously a lot of leadership, as well as a phenomenal rugby player. But I think that for Sia's sake, I think that a reset is probably needed. You know, going through the whole divorce and the last couple of years and injuries, the likes of that, he's not quite been able to have the Sharks career he probably thought he might have on his return from wrestling. And I think a bit of a reset, moving back to Cape Town, which is home for him, is a good move for him. Grant Williams is going to be a massive miss, but I do think that Thomas Toy coming back means that their prop depth is insane. You know, they'll probably play him at tight head alongside Oxen Chair, Mongi Manambi. I mean, that's probably one of the best international front rows you could probably have, let alone a club front row. If we then look at the Lions, for example, and as mentioned, only one player coming in, which is Bone Fenter. That's a phenomenal signing from the Lions. First of all, we needed props for a while. We do need more players in. But for me, what's so exciting about the fact is the Lions are right on the brink of qualifying for URC playoffs and potentially the Champions Cup for the first time. And they've basically obviously sold a vision because look at the extensions over there. Morne Vandenberg, Ruan Venter, Quan Horn, those are the three that really stand out. I mean, those are your current Springboks that are sort of in the squad. Morne Vandenberg obviously has played quite a few games last year, and all of them have committed to mostly 2028. Lions don't often really do necessarily very long-term contracts, but that's basically another 2 seasons at least. Harsh and Pede, huge signing as well. There were always lots of supporter doubts and maybe a bit of in the Twitter sphere or an X the likes of that. Lots of fans saying the Lions obviously don't back him, which I don't think was ever true. I just think we had ridiculously good scrum half depth and we had a plan on how we were going to bring him through. Morne Vandenberg has been the Lions' best player this season when he's played. It's been quite simple, to be honest, and I think Harsh and Pede has had to bide his time, as most players do when they kind of come in. And actually, if you look at the contract extensions, this also includes JC Pretorius, who hasn't played much. But I think the big thing for me, especially as a Lions fan, is players who have really come through the season and been stars. You're looking at Bronson Mills or Kelly Mpeku, SJ Kotzer, RF Schoolman as well. They've been really good for the Lions, and they've also extended. And to lock down Kelly Mpeku, Bronson Mills for another 3 years is a big acquisition, because I think we've got a really good core side. Bone Fenter will only make it a bit better, but for once we might not see the line exodus that we're kind of used to seeing. At this stage, only Johnny Lombard has been confirmed leaving. So the main thing is that they're going to keep a core of the squad, and hopefully they can kind of sneak into the playoffs this season and next season have a really good go at trying to win a URC, trying to get quite far in a Champions Cup and seeing what might happen. The Stormers have made 2 very big signings, not necessarily young signings so far, but they're bringing in Wilco Louw and Sia Khaleesi. Now, I think Wilco Louw is probably the best signing that any of the franchises have made so far, before the going kind of into the off season. He can potentially transform a pack which already has some really talented props. They obviously lost Steven Kitsoff, which wasn't part of the plans. I mean, he was there on a long-term contract, was basically planning on finishing his career at the Stormers. They've had to try and kind of bear with that. They've had Francois Herber, who's had basically almost 2 years off because of injuries, is coming back into the mix now. And now you've got Wilco Louw, who is arguably the best scrummaging tight head in the world. That kind of acquisition is massive. I mean, he was one of the Bulls' top 3 best players last season when they got to the final. And even this season, he's been fantastic when he has played. So that is a huge signing. Sia Khaleesi is a big signing as well, from a commercial value. Again, as mentioned, from a leadership point of view. He's coming home as a really good rhetoric to add. He's adding a calm head, because they are losing some leaders in the likes of Ruben van Heerden and Salman Murat. And I want to chat about the Salman Murat departure, because I think this is the best move he could make to actually prolong and to actually even try and kickstart his Springbok career. Salman Murat has been a player who we've been waiting to take the next step for many years. He has played for the Boks. He has captained the Boks. He was obviously basically identified very young as a future potential Springbok great. Injuries have not helped him, and he's had lots of seasons where he just hasn't had the game time. And unfortunately, due to all the hype, he's kind of always been playing with a metaphorical almost sort of chip on his shoulder, where everyone's basically looking at him and expecting probably more than a player who has had the kind of game time and the injury record that he has. And he's kind of been thrust into the spotlight. I don't think that they've really helped him by making captain of teams very early on. Whenever you speak to players and coaches, they all say the same thing, that his leadership value and the way he's in the squads, it becomes a no-brainer, but it does attract a lot of attention. And I think that making the move over to France is brilliant for him. John Dobson spoke about the abuse that he's been getting online and even in person to a certain degree, and how people have really kind of written him off. And he says he can't understand it for a player that they rate so highly. But I think a bit like kind of Herschel Yankees, this is a great move for him. He gets to go and get basically out of the eye of the South African public. He's going to go to the best league in the world. It's called a spade a spade. Top 14 is the best league in the world. And hopefully, if he can get over the injury issues, he's going to play week in, week out in a league that is physical, that is, probably about as close you can get to sort of test match rugby in certain of those clashes. And hopefully really start to show what he's all about, with us always sort of applying the microscope and the magnifying glass to him. So I think it's a great move. I think it's actually a big loss for the Stormers. I think they'll probably maybe notice it a bit more. But the big thing for the Stormers is the Sashfami Zulu extension to 2029, alongside the likes of Yuri Matia, alongside an Evan Roos for 2 more years, alongside a Paul de Villiers. So they've retained very, very well. They are losing 2 big locks. So and lock, I think, has always been a bit of an issue from a depth point of view. But in general, I think they've retained most of the players they kind of that they can kind of deal with. For me, the team that's going through the biggest transition is the Bulls, and we are seeing that from Johan Ackerman taking over, starting to sort of come right type of situation. But they are losing Wilco Louw, who was top 3 best players for them last season. Ruan Nokia, probably in that top 3 best players last season or in the last few seasons. And David Creel, who's probably been their most consistent performer, in the backline at least, for the last couple of years as well. So they are losing 3 very, very important players. David Creel at centre, at outside centre, as well as at fullback, as well as you can play on the wing and at inside centre. Wilco Louw is your cornerstone of your scrum, and Ruan Nokia is the engine room, and he's been phenomenal the last few years. So those are 3 huge players to lose. I think they have missed out on Sebasito Mbulele. You had Nkosi retiring. That we kind of always knew that was on the cards in the last few years. Interesting players they're bringing in, though. Dylan Mart, from club to the Stormers and now to the Bulls, obviously didn't really back himself to get the opportunities he wanted. Thakir Abrahams in at fullback or else on the wing there for Johan Ackerman. Hanno Liebenberg is a big addition. I mean, you're losing a Ruan Nokia, bringing back a Hanno Liebenberg. You don't type the sort of position player, but you are bringing in leadership, for example. You're bringing physicality. You're bringing in a really, really top-class player. And then Tyler Mason as well as Mwanda Mbanda. If you look at some of their retentions, for example, what was very interesting is that Mpilo Gamede, for example, has signed a long-term contract. Now, this is a player who was in the box squad a couple of years ago because of the form he was showing, and he's still so young, and then kind of fell away. Now, obviously, I think that Johan Ackerman has basically said that they're going to back him. What the Bulls have done well is they have retained a lot of players on decently length contracts. So you're looking at a Cheswell Juster, for example. He's on a 4-year extension. Sebastian de Klerk, who's been in such good form, 2028. What this doesn't mention, and we're kind of waiting for it to happen, is that they're also about to set to lose Ambrose Papier. So they're definitely losing the most players, because I think if you looked at like a top 10 best Bulls players in the last 12 months, they're going to lose 5 of them. In Wilco Louw, Ruan Nokia, David Creel, 4 of them in Ambrose Papier. So when you lose 40% of your top 10 players, it is a big hole to sort of fill. They have, I think, definitely, especially in the forwards, retained very well, but they are definitely going to miss some of the players that are leaving. But the big thing with the Bulls, they've had so much depth for a while. They now need their youngsters to step in. Your JF van Heerdens, your Reinhard Ludwigs. They need Kobus Wiese to really start stepping up. Keegan Johannes, for example, this is an opportunity to, it might even shift back to scrum off, but to really start coming to the fore. Cameron Harnekom needs to get fit and firing again, as does Mpilo Gamede needs to get back onto the mix. So it's a really interesting group of transfers across these franchises. I think the Bulls are probably going to struggle the most at this stage. The Lions, it looks like really good continuity. Stormers and Sharks, I think TBC. I think the Stormers have got a big signing in Wilco Louw. and aren't losing too many of the big players. I think it'll be interesting to sort of see who they promote internally. And the Sharks, well, I think they just need to find a bit of an identity and kind of decide how and who they're going to back, because we see a lot of chopping and change, and they've got some very talented youngsters. Obviously, won the Currie Cup with a lot of them, but we haven't really seen some of them as much as we probably thought we would. So what are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.